Most people like to think of themselves as good. They hold doors open. They say please and thank you. They recycle. They check the I agree box on petitions. They try not to hurt others. But what if being good isn't a stable trait? What if it's less about who you are and more about where you are? What if under the right pressure, even the kindest soul can become unrecognizable? Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, the man behind the infamous Stanford prison experiment, offered us a disturbing lens into this question. He called it the Lucifer Effect, the transformation of ordinary individuals into perpetrators of cruelty. Not because they were born evil, but because they stepped into a system that quietly, gradually, and powerfully shaped them. We love stories with villains. They give us comfort. They create distance. We imagine evil wearing a mask, speaking in threats, dressed in obvious danger. But history has shown us something far more unsettling. The most dangerous acts are often carried out not by monsters, but by neighbors, by teachers, by parents, by people who once smiled kindly in passing. The Holocaust didn't begin in gas chambers. It began with language, with normalization, with silence. Colonialism didn't thrive because a few tyrants forced it. It thrived because millions complied. Slavery, torture, mass surveillance, social cleansing. These weren't just the works of tyrants. They were built, maintained, and justified by systems full of good people. Zimbardo's experiment wasn't fiction. It was a mirror. He watched as normal college students, assigned the role of prison guards, began to degrade and dehumanize their peers within days. Not because they were sadists, but because roles, anonymity, and unchecked power altered their perception of right and wrong. It's easy to say, I'd never do that. But the truth is, we don't know. We don't know who we'd become in an environment that rewards obedience over empathy, that trades morality for conformity, that teaches silence as survival. We are all shaped by context. And when that context shifts, when fear enters, when approval is dangled, when identity is threatened, the psyche adapts, sometimes beautifully, but sometimes dangerously. Evil isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like doing nothing. Sometimes it looks like following orders. Sometimes it looks like keeping your head down, while harm is being done just out of sight. This isn't a condemnation. It's a call to humility. A reminder that goodness is not a permanent status. It's a daily practice. And without awareness, even that practice can be hijacked. Because what if the real danger isn't the presence of evil, but the absence of questioning? When was the last time you asked why you follow a rule? When was the last time you resisted the pull of groupthink? Not because it was unsafe, but because it was wrong. The Lucifer Effect isn't a theory locked in a lab. It's alive in classrooms, corporations, online mobs, political rallies. It's present every time we trade our voice for safety and call it virtue. The scariest monsters are not those born in darkness. They're the ones who slowly, silently, unknowingly stopped noticing the light. Imagine this. You're handed a uniform, a name badge, a clipboard, maybe even a title. Alongside it comes a new set of rules, clear, structured, and impersonal. Suddenly, you're no longer just you. You're a role, a function, a cog in something much bigger. You didn't design the machine. You're just expected to operate it. At first, it feels harmless. You're cooperating, contributing. You're told it's for the greater good. Maybe you even feel proud, useful, respected. secure within a structure that tells you who you are and what to do. But here's where it begins. The slow erosion of inner questioning. The gradual replacement of conscience with compliance. A minor compromise here. A harmless exception there. You rationalize. This isn't my decision. I'm not the one in charge. I'm just doing what I was told. And over time, something shifts. The line between who you are and what you've been assigned to be becomes harder to see. Until one day, it disappears entirely. This is how people fall. Not with a single monstrous act, but through a series of small, quiet decisions that feel justifiable in the moment. What begins as obedience becomes detachment. What starts as a role becomes an identity. And what once felt optional becomes necessary. Zimbardo witnessed this transformation up close during the Stanford prison experiment. College students, ordinary, well-adjusted young adults, were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners. Within 36 hours, the simulation spiraled. Guards began enforcing arbitrary punishments. Prisoners broke down emotionally. Cruelty escalated, not because the participants were inherently violent, but because the system encouraged it. The role made it easy. The uniform made it feel sanctioned. They weren't told to harm anyone, but the environment whispered, "You have permission." And that whisper is powerful. In every corner of the world, we see it echoed. In militaries that dehumanize enemies. In corporations that prioritize profit over people. In social hierarchies that reward obedience more than conscience. The most frightening truth? We are more shaped by the systems we serve than we'd like to admit. We believe we act from character. That our inner moral compass guides us through every situation. But under pressure, under authority, under the influence of a strong group identity, most of us adapt. We shift. We blend in. Not because we are evil, but because questioning feels dangerous. Disobedience feels isolating. And silence feels safe. In toxic environments, morality doesn't vanish in an instant. It dissolves. Slowly. Quietly. And by the time you notice the silence inside you, it's already been replaced with the echo of someone else's rules. That's the real horror of Zimbardo's findings. Not that cruelty exists, but that it lives so close to the surface. That under the right conditions, good people can become the very thing they once feared. And if we're not vigilant, if we don't keep asking, "Why am I doing this?" we may find ourselves playing a part in something we no longer recognize. So the question remains, are you still thinking for yourself? Or just playing your role a little too well? It's easy to point at history and say, "I would never do that." We look at atrocities. We study the faces of those who carried them out. And we convince ourselves they were different, less human, less moral, less us. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't need to be evil to do harm. You just need to stop paying attention. And sometimes, that's all it takes. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to test this very idea. He gathered ordinary people, teachers, salesmen, parents, gave them simple instructions. Sit down, ask questions, administer electric shocks when the answers are wrong. And then, a man in a lab coat says, "Please continue." The screams come, the protests, the begging. But still most of them obeyed. They weren't cruel. They weren't violent. They were obedient. Because the responsibility didn't feel like theirs. The man in the coat said it was fine. The clipboard made it official. The system said it was necessary. And in that quiet surrender, morality was replaced by protocol. That's the Lucifer Effect. Not a possession, not some sudden descent into darkness, but a gradual disconnection from the self, from conscience, from compassion, a slow erosion of resistance. It doesn't start with monsters. It starts with people like you, people like me. It starts with trust in the wrong voices, with fear of questioning, with comfort in silence. Because silence doesn't protect you, it corrupts you. Every time you witness harm and say nothing, you train your nervous system to tolerate it, to normalize it, to become part of it. At first you flinch, then you look away, then you stop looking, and eventually you forget you were ever watching. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But maybe even more terrifying is the day you stop seeing yourself at all. When your choices no longer feel like choices, just reactions, just compliance. When you stop asking, 'Is this right?' and start asking, 'Will I get in trouble?' That's when the danger begins. Not because you're cruel, but because you've stopped listening to your own inner voice. So ask yourself, have you ever laughed at something you knew was wrong, just to fit in? Stayed silent when a boundary was crossed, just to avoid conflict? Justified someone else's harm because it was easier than standing alone? These moments may seem small, but they're the cracks where corruption enters. Because the most dangerous monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're sitting quietly in bright rooms, doing as they're told, smiling, nodding, complying. Not evil, just asleep. But awareness is a choice. And once you wake up, you can't unknow what you've seen. You can't unhear the voice that says, "This isn't right." The question is, will you listen to it next time? Because morality isn't what you believe when life is easy. It's who you choose to be when silence feels safer than speaking. Environment doesn't just influence behavior, it constructs it. We like to believe that our actions are driven by inner virtue or fixed values. That if a moment of moral tension ever arose, we'd stand firm, speak up, walk away. But history and psychology tell a different story. A quieter, more disturbing one. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo conducted an experiment that would later haunt the field of psychology. The Stanford prison experiment wasn't designed to study evil. It was meant to observe role adaptation. What happens when you place good, intelligent young men in a simulated prison? Assign some as guards, others as prisoners, and simply watch. What happened was more than adaptation. It was transformation. Within days, the guards, who had been instructed to maintain order without violence, began showing signs of aggression, humiliation, even sadism. Prisoners were stripped, degraded, isolated. And Zimbardo, the researcher, didn't stop it. Not because he didn't care, but because he too got swept into the role of prison superintendent. The situation swallowed everyone. Why? Because the environment whispered permission. The uniforms conferred power. The mock prison became real. The system itself had a logic, and that logic made cruelty seem not only acceptable, but necessary. Zimbardo called this process the Lucifer Effect, the way ordinary people, under certain pressures, commit extraordinary harm. Not because they are inherently evil, but because the environment deactivates their moral compass, or worse, replaces it with a new one. We think moral failure looks like malice, but often it looks like obedience. It looks like silence in the face of injustice. It looks like following the group because that's how it's always been. It looks like smiling through discomfort, laughing at the wrong joke, Not because you agree, but because resistance feels dangerous. Most of us have been there, in subtle ways. We've watched someone be mistreated and said nothing. We've ignored our gut because the room didn't seem to notice. We've swallowed discomfort to preserve the illusion of harmony. Not because we're bad people, but because situational pressure is real, and context often overrides conscience. But this doesn't make you powerless. It makes you responsible. Because once you understand how systems shape behavior, you can begin to question them. You can stop asking, "Would I ever do something like that?" and start asking, "What kind of environment would tempt me to?" That shift is everything. Because real moral strength isn't about believing you're immune. It's about being honest enough to know you're not, and courageous enough to remain conscious in situations designed to numb you. You don't fight darkness by pretending it's not there. You fight it by noticing when the lights begin to dim and choosing to stay awake. If the environment can corrupt, it can also awaken. Because just as some surrender to pressure, others rise under it. We've all heard stories of moral collapse, of ordinary people doing unthinkable things when placed in roles, systems, or social contexts that normalize harm. But we hear less often about the quiet resistance, the subtle defiance, the individuals who say no, not loudly, not heroically, but consistently. What makes these people different? It's not some genetic immunity, not a superhuman strength. It's awareness. It's a cultivated sense of inner alignment, a decision, not once but repeatedly, to live in accordance with values rather than circumstances. Psychologist Ervin Staub, a Holocaust survivor and researcher of moral courage, discovered something profound. Those who intervene in the face of injustice tend to share a few things in common. They've thought deeply about right and wrong. They've imagined scenarios ahead of time. They see themselves not as passive bystanders, but as agents of moral responsibility. In short, moral courage isn't spontaneous. It's practiced. It's built, moment by moment, through reflection, empathy, and inner rehearsal. It's the result of living with integrity even when no one is watching, of cultivating an identity not based on external approval, but internal coherence. And the beauty of that? It means resistance isn't limited to a chosen few. It's available to all of us. Zimbardo, after spending years studying the terrifying ease with which people fall into cruelty, didn't give up on human nature. He founded the Heroic Imagination Project, a movement dedicated to teaching people, especially the young, how to act with courage under pressure, how to notice manipulation, how to pause before obeying, how to see themselves not as powerless, but as capable of interrupting cycles of harm. Because heroism isn't always grand. Sometimes it's a whisper in a loud room, a refusal to laugh at cruelty, a decision to stay when it's easier to leave, or to walk away when it's easier to stay. These moments rarely go viral. They don't make headlines, but they shape character. They influence those around us, and they become the building blocks of a different kind of world, one built not on compliance, but on conscience. Here's the deeper truth we often miss. The same psychological mechanisms that make us vulnerable to evil also make us capable of extraordinary good. The same instinct to belong, to adapt, to align, to conform, can be used to protect rather than destroy. It's not about removing the mechanism. It's about redirecting it. You don't need to be perfect to act with integrity. You just need to choose, over and over again, which part of yourself you want to strengthen. The Lucifer Effect may show us how easy it is to fall, but it also reveals how powerful it is to stand. And in a world constantly testing your values, sometimes standing, quietly, intentionally, unshakably, is the most radical act of all. Evil doesn't always come dressed in shadows. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it's silent. It looks like a person who follows orders, who keeps their head down, who tells themselves, "It's not my place. It's not that bad. Someone else will speak up." This is the real warning of the Lucifer Effect. The ease with which ordinary people can become instruments of harm, not out of hatred, but out of habit. Not through cruelty, but through compliance. It's tempting to believe that evil belongs to them, the villains, the monsters, the sociopaths. But history has shown us otherwise. Atrocities are rarely committed by outliers. They're carried out by people who, under different conditions, might have seemed perfectly good. And that's the danger, the illusion of goodness. Because as long as you believe you are automatically on the right side, you'll stop asking hard questions. You'll excuse harm as necessity. You'll silence doubt in favor of comfort. You'll become a guardian of the system without ever realizing you're upholding something broken. So how do you resist? It doesn't begin with heroics. It begins with awareness. You resist by questioning, not just others, but yourself. You ask, where have I looked away? Where have I gone silent? Where have I traded integrity for belonging? You notice the moments where convenience overrules conscience. You name the ways your silence has served your comfort. And then, slowly, painfully, you begin the work of choosing differently. Because morality isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn, decision by decision. Not in theory, but in tension. Not when it's easy, but when it costs something. Standing up, speaking out, choosing empathy over ego. These acts will not always make you likable, but they will make you free. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming yourself, truly, requires more than self-expression. It requires self-confrontation. You must walk into your own contradictions. Face the parts of you that justify harm, that enjoy power, that prefer silence to struggle. And it is in that reckoning, not in your reputation, that your character is shaped. Because silence, too, is a choice. And often, it is the most dangerous one. So, the next time you feel the urge to stay quiet, when your gut tightens, when your voice falters, pause. Ask yourself, who am I becoming? Not by what I do, but by what I tolerate. Who benefits from my silence? And maybe the harder question, would I even recognize myself if I stopped pretending to be the good one? Because that's the final twist in the Lucifer Effect. The most dangerous people are not those who believe they are evil. It's those who believe they are incapable of it.